Yeah.
Ho, ho, ho!
Hello, my gorgeous, beautiful, wonderful queen bees. It is your girl Amanda, the Buzzed Artist. Welcome back to my channel. Today, we are going to be doing a fun palette knife painting, ladies and gentlemen, and it's going to be in a winter scene, displaying with some mountains and some fir trees. I am super stoked to try this out. And of course, all the supplies that I use for this tutorial you will find in the description below, so be sure to check that out. But I've just been so obsessed with palette painting lately. It's kind of become my go-to with a lot of expressive painting, and that's why I really like it. So to start off, I just decided, hey, I'm gonna grab some white titanium paint and just squeeze out a good glob towards the top of my canvas as well as on the bottom. And then I'm gonna grab my ultramarine blue, maybe just do a little bit of squeezing of the colors towards the middle parts of the canvas, as well as grabbing a little bit of cold gray and dispersing those colors into my canvas as well, so that I can prep it for palette knife painting. And what I am doing here is setting up the stage for making our mountains, which kind of have that cold gray blue kind of thing going on with it. And mind you, palette knife painting does use a lot of pigments, a lot of paint, so I suggest if this is your first time and you want to just play around with palette knives, just go with some cheap paint to start with so that you can get the hang of the entire feel and the amount of paint you're going to be using here. And what I decided to use here was some Arteza paint, and these worked really well with textures. They're more of a soft body paint, so it's really nice gliding and pushing around with the knife. So now I went and grabbed my palette knife and decided to work on the white areas first, creating what would be the ground and the sky areas. And then I would go ahead and start to smear that paint and start to create the ridges of the mountain. Well, I kind of turn my palette knife at an angle so I can start to establish the more ridgy, sharp corners of that cliff, of those mountains. And I just literally do that with the edge of my palette knife. Now, a lot of this just goes by feel, so you can watch me do this, and as you're following along with me, play around with your knife, use the tips if you'd like, use the edges like I'm doing, but best of all, just take your time in trying to play around with pushing the paint and getting a feel for what feels good for you. And y'all, I probably said this about 500 million times, but when it comes to texture, palette knife painting is right up there. You got that impasto kind of look, and you kind of get like an oil-ish looking painting because you're creating these nice thick ridges of paint, and you really can add an extra dimension to your paintings that way by doing it. So I even went back up to where the sky was, tried to grab a little bit of that blue that I had in the mountains, and made kind of a swirl effect using my palette knife edge just to kind of help me grab some of that color and add a little blue to that sky, as well as a little bit of blue to the white snow that's going to be on the ground. Now I'm trying to spread out the paint as much as I can, and upon doing palette knife painting for the first time, you're going to end up using a lot of paint like I kind of ended up doing. So what I did to kind of compensate for that was scrape off a good deal of the paint and lay it to the side of my palette so that I can just grab some of it for later. And I just do a very gentle scraping to the top surface just to grab some of that extra paint off so that I can use some of that for another step. But y'all, Christmas is just around the corner. Now I'm actually filming a lot of this stuff in advance because I'm expecting my little girl to be coming either just a couple weeks before December the beginning of December or a couple weeks after December. And I'm going to be taking a little break from filming and doing tutorials just so I can spend some quality time with her and, you know, just learn this whole mom thing. So I'm trying to pre-record a ton of these tutorials so that you can have something to look at and follow along to while I'm a little predisposed with my daughter. But yo, I'm just waiting for Christmas to come here. I am just so excited. It is, on top of Halloween, it is one of my more favorite holidays. I love Thanksgiving. I love Christmas. It's just a time of being with family, of being together, and of course, eating a butt ton of food and being totally okay with that, considering that I will be a new mom and I will be handling just a newborn baby. It's going to be a very interesting Christmas, a lot of sleepless nights, but I'm really looking forward to it all, so that's really fun. So now, as you can see, I kind of go back and forth with the grays and the ultramarine blue to establish more of the ridges of our mountains here. And again, you can go back and forth with this, go by feel, see how the paint is kind of gliding with you. As you can see here, I'm starting to get more and more used to using the palette knife, so I start to use a lot more of an angled approach using the edge of my palette knife to give me those more sharp, crisp edges that I'm looking for. And I'm trying to think about where I want all those strokes to be. If I have a stroke that goes over another stroke, it looks like that part of the cliff is in front of the other cliff. So I'm always trying to keep that in mind, where I'm placing my strokes and how it is that I'm doing that. So just pay a little bit of attention to that as you're doing this. Then I went ahead and grabbed that excess white paint that I had scraped off earlier, and I just recycled that and started doing the white caps of those mountains. I wanted to represent this more as the lighter side of the mountain as well, that not necessarily has snow on it, but has light reflecting on it, and the gray and the blues would be more of the shadow areas. So think about that as you're doing your palette knife painting, when you're trying to establish where the lights are of your mountain versus the more darker areas, which you're going to represent with a darker color, obviously. In this case here, I'm using the darker sides of the mountains, represented by the more blues and the grays and the whites. And the white titanium paint is going to represent more of the lighter sides, the more highlight portions of the mountain itself. And you can experiment with different textures and strokes with your palette knife. You can do a tapping motion just to make the snow or to make the hill appear a little bit rockier. You can use the edge of your palette knife to get a very sharp, crisp line, and you can even scrape off the excess paint to show some of the blue from underneath so that you can get more of a shadow appearance. Now, I really do go back and forth on the mountain here, alternating between the grays, the blues, and the whites, and I keep pushing that paint until it kind of feels right to me. And I would suggest looking at pictures of mountains as references for this, just so you can get an idea of how the highlights are going to work, where the light hits, where there's shadows, and try to push your paint towards those areas. So try to think about form, try to think about where your light is hitting, where your shadows are, and try to get those colors to reflect that as best as you can. Now, at first glance, as you're working with palette knife paints, again, it is messy, and it may not look like anything to you. You may even feel like you're not making any progress whatsoever. But as you can see, the more I've been pushing the paint, working around with the length of my textures, it's starting to come together. But I had to take a little bit of time to do so. So right now I'm just mixing that blue and gray once again to help me make my shadows so that I can again establish more depth in my painting. So don't lose faith, don't lose hope. If you feel like this is not going anywhere, just keep pushing paint, relax, enjoy and breathe through this entire process. It can be a little scary. It's very different than handling a brush, right? With a brush, you can use and manipulate different strokes. With a palette knife, you're really working with textures, you're working with globs of paint at a time. So that involves a little bit more of almost like a sculpture kind of aesthetic to it. You kind of have to push the paint in the right direction so it kind of sits right, as well as giving it the right amount of strokes too. But it's nothing to be intimidated about. It's acrylic paint. It's not like oil paint where it's going to take days or months to dry. And you can totally fix mistakes if you ever make them. Just wait for the paint to dry, and then you can go over it with a different color and have at it. So you really can't go wrong when it comes to using acrylic paints. And just for added form, I dipped the tip of my palette knife in a little bit of ultramarine blue and just went at the edges of the peaks set against the white of the sky so that I can just get an extra added contrast between those two colors. And it really does show really, really well. The thing I really like about palette knife painting is the very rough way that the paint just globs onto the canvas when you're making it come off of your palette knife. I don't know why, I just like it so much. And when you're doing mountains, it's almost as if this was made for making mountains. So I use a little bit of that ultramarine blue at the tip of my palette knife just to kind of help me establish those contrast points against the outline of the sky, as well as against the cliff faces amongst each other. I added more blues on the cliffs that were in front of other cliffs, so it shows again a little bit of depth. It shows that there are cliffs that are in front of other cliffs, as you can see here. And of course, kind of like a broken record, I go back and forth. I add even more white areas to the tops of the cliffs just to establish once again that those are in the forefront and that there is texture going on here. And as if I couldn't say no to more paint, I actually went ahead and just globbed a little bit more titanium white on top of that area of the snow. I wasn't able to really get a lot of snowbanks around that area, so I just literally poured more titanium white there and just pushed the titanium paint in the direction of where I wanted it all to go. And I'm kind of using a sweeping horizontal motion stroke, again, just to establish a set of textures. If you want to do a bit of a different look of your snow, experiment with the length and width of your strokes. You can make your lines not go horizontally like mine do. You can make them go in a spiral direction. It's really, really up to you, but I kind of maintained a more horizontal stroke aspect with my palette knife, occasionally experimenting with doing an up and down stroke, again, just to help me with my coverage, and also to just test the waters and see what that looks like as well. So really, you can't go wrong here. Again, just play, experiment, feel it out, what you like and what you don't like. And now we're going to make our fir trees, so I'm just grabbing a little bit of my Prussian green and some yellow ochre, mixing those together. And I'm also, because the color is just not as dark as I want it to be, I add a little bit of ultramarine blue just to get that nice deeper green that I am looking for. And we're going to be using this to make the beginnings of our fir tree. So I gather some of that paint on the edge of my palette knife, make a straight line vertically with my palette knife, and then turn my palette knife horizontally and just tap on the leaves basically of our fir tree. And I go down the length of that line, and I try to make the widths go bigger and bigger towards the bottom. and it just thins out as it gets to the top of the tree. And I, again, experimenting with strokes. I keep saying this over and over again, that it's all about experimenting and kind of feeling out what you like and what you don't like. But with the tree here, I actually, after I established all those strokes, I kind of went in at every level of where I made those branches and turning my brush to a sort of like a 45-degree angle, pushed the paint either downward or off to the side, just again to imitate the direction of those branches and where they would be going. Most of the time when you're looking at fir trees, you got the sides of the branches that kind of splay outwards, and then you also, if you look in the middle of the fir trees, you also got some branches that kind of go down. So I'm trying to imitate that as best as I can with my palette knife here, using either the tips or just the long form edges to help me get the right look. Now, you may not get this on the first shot, and that's okay. I highly recommend that you just keep going back and forth, play with your strokes, keep grabbing more of that green paint, and keep establishing more and more of those little strokes in the tree so that you can feel out a really good fir branch with your palette knife. It's going to take a little bit of practice, and don't worry if it's not right on the first try. Just keep playing with it. You'll be fine, I promise. And then I just proceed and repeat for as many trees as I want to do here. I think I added about six or seven more trees into this landscape, but feel free to add more, or feel free to just put that one there. It's really up to you, but I just use the same principles like I did with the first tree. I turn my palette knife to the edge to establish the vertical line. Then I either turn my palette knife horizontally to make the branches, or I just use the tips and make horizontal lines going down and it gets bigger and bigger as it gets toward the base of the tree to establish a fir looking tree. And because as we're playing with texture, we're playing with palette knives, we have to think about the direction of those fir trees basically, and how those leaves are falling. So keep that in mind as you're doing all this. And just to share a little secret with you, I actually went back in with just pure Prussian green with the tip of my brush, just again to give me a little bit more of an added contrast against the green that I had previously put down. I wanted to add just a little bit more of a color variety and to help fill in some parts of the fir tree that I think that I had missed. So I'm even making more trees in front of the trees that I had put down with that Prussian green so that it looks like there's just multiples and multiples of trees here. So totally up to you if you want to do this part. I figured I would let you know and show you that the possibilities are really just endless when it comes to making trees. And plus, if you aren't sick of making trees by now, I don't know what, but this is a really, really great practice for making trees with your palette knife. So take advantage of it, baby. I mean, just have fun, play around with the knife, use the edges, use the tips, have fun. And what snowy scene would be without its snow-laden branches, right? So I just grab just a little bit of that titanium white and add it towards the top parts of where I had placed my branches here. So again, this involves just a little bit of patience. Just try to remember where you put your branches, and then you want to place the white on top of those branches. Now my strokes are just a bit thicker. You can choose to do even thinner looking strokes to add in that paint so that it doesn't look like it's completely laid down, but it's up to you, honestly. And I went ahead and did the same exact thing with the other fir trees that are in the background, just giving them white little specks to once again represent the amount of snow that is on the boughs. And then, ladies and gentlemen, from here on out, I start to do my finishing touches. Once again, as if I haven't used enough paint as it is, I squeeze a little bit more titanium white just so that I can establish a bit more of a whiter surface and to partially cover some of the bottom portions of our fir trees that we had laid down previously. I really want this to look like it's buried in snow, so I literally just proceeded to do the fir trees first, and then I'm just going to do those globs of white, following the same kind of textures that I'm looking for with my snow over the fir trees here. So that's really the trick that I went after here, was to do just that. Now you may notice that some of the green will streak if your paint is not completely dry, and that's okay. You can just add a little bit more white if you are impatient like I was, and just push the paint around until you got enough of that green covered. Otherwise, you can just wait for this to dry and then just go over with your white. Totally up to you once again. And of course, we always got to have that one diva tree that's just breaking on through, right? So I just decided to add a little bit more boughs onto that first initial tree that we made, just so it looks like it's in the forefront and that it's not completely covered in snow. But again, you don't have to do that part if you don't want to. I should make this the theme of this video, which is whatever feels right for you. You just do that. So now from here on out, I'm just adding the very finishing touches, adding a bit more of that ultramarine blue to the mountains to add a bit more of that contrast that I'm looking for, as well as adding in the finishing touches and textures to the sky itself. I kind of noticed that the sky, to me, it looked a little bit more bland than I wanted it to, so really I just took some of that white, once again, poured it straight onto the canvas itself, and used a more circular kind of C-shaped motion with my palette knife to help me create a softer looking sky. Again, if you wanted to keep a more horizontal stroke with your sky like I had before, by all means keep that. It's a different aesthetic. I just figured I wanted my mountain background, I wanted my sky really to look a little softer, like there was maybe some clouds kind of peering in the background. So I kind of achieved that by doing this more circular stroke with my palette knife. Again, you can do whatever feels right for you. This is just what felt right for me, and I made sure to just use the edge of my knife against the edges of the cliff there, just so I can keep that straight, nice, crisp contrast between those two entities. That's how you can go ahead and make your very own palette knife painting, and I really hope that you enjoyed this tutorial and following along with me. If you did, please be sure to like this video and to subscribe to my channel. Hit that like button, you know what to do, so that you can see more videos like this from me to you in the future. I sincerely hope you had fun, that you pushed yourself a little bit, and most importantly of all, loved yourself throughout the entire process. Alright everyone, I will talk to you all next time. Bye!